Hey everyone, Julie Caraccio. Welcome to Reawaken Your Brilliance. We're mixing things up this week. Normally I'm in the studio, but we had an issue, and so we're going to Skype, or not Skype, we're going to be on Google Hangouts today. I'm very excited. We are going to be talking about Kim Jobst about the disease of meaning. He's been a real trooper. I had to switch things on him, and he had to go to London for the evening, and he's sitting in the basement of this beautiful hotel looking very wonderful. So first I'd like you to read Kim's bio to tell you all about him. Dr. Kim Jobst is a consultant physician with specialist accreditation in general internal medicine and in neurodegenerative diseases and dementia. He also has specialist training as a medical homeopath, has completed Jungian training analysis, as well as training in acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, food state nutritional supplementation, and lifestyle interventions for over 25 years. He is consulted by clients from all over the world, and his expertise is integrated healthcare is sought internationally. He is currently engaged in programs in India and the USA. Welcome, Dr. Kim.
Hi. It's really nice to be with you.
Thank you, and again, thank you so much for your flexibility. So let's get started. I am so fascinated by what you're doing. We had a Skype conversation a couple months ago, and to me, you're the future of where we need to go in healthcare. So what do you mean by the disease of meaning?
So I have a conventional medical training as a background, but really I entered into medical training as a result of a number of experiences, both as a child and as a teenager, which brought me into contact with other systems of medicine. First of all with Oriental medicine, and then with macrobiotics and dietary intervention, and then with the Alexander technique and other ways of working with the body. And as a result of all of that, and then meeting homeopathy in my teens, I knew that there had to be another way of really more deeply understanding the way in which human beings function. At the time, I actually wanted to go off and study agricultural sciences and forestry to go to work with my father. And I was actually rounding up cattle in Colorado one day during my year between school and university, when I had an absolutely overwhelming certainty that I had to go and do medicine. I didn't want to do medicine. I didn't want to commit myself to 7 years of study and all the drudgery, but this was something that happened from one moment to the next. I turned my horse around, went back to the ranch, told the ranch manager, and I came back to England, and in a way the rest is history. I went to Oxford, I started in agricultural sciences, but I knew that I had to do medicine, and I changed into medicine. Now, the reason that I tell you all of that is that I went into medicine not because I wanted to be a doctor. I went into medicine because I have had, ever since I was a little boy, a driving passion to understand how human beings work, what human beings are, and how we can make sense of what it is that's going on in their lives. I had always known that we are here for a reason, and from a very early age I had this feeling that ultimately that love is at the basis of everything, but somehow, although I felt that, it didn't make sense when I saw suffering, and I saw people suffering, and you know, one sees all the terror that is out there in the world. Somehow I needed to make sense of it. Those questions, that search drove me. And at the time, when that impulse, the imperative to do medicine came, it was as part of that journey, part of that search. I had the sense that by studying science and studying medicine, I would be able to go deeper into that whole mystery, because my natural talents were in the arts, in theatre, in languages, and in music. And during the course of those studies, I started to study Chinese medicine. I went to study acupuncture in secret as a medical student, because at that time, you would be struck off the medical register if you were fraternizing with practitioners of fringe medicine. This is as recent as 1985.
Wow.
And, you know, it was really serious stuff at the time. And I found myself drawn deeper and deeper into just being alongside people in the hospitals, especially when one is on call and up throughout the night. And what began to take place in me was a deepening certainty that medical illnesses, suffering occurs for a reason. It has to have a reason. It has to have a basis at the core of which is the information needed to cure it. And I pursued my studies, I pursued the acupuncture. I ended up doing research in Oxford on acupuncturing disabling breathlessness, which was published in the leading medical journal of the time, in The Lancet, which made big news worldwide in 1986. And as a result of that, I was invited to present that work in India at a conference on holistic health and medicine. And as a result of that, I got to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I had a one-on-one experience, exchange, consultation with him, which was an extraordinary experience. And as a result of that, I was invited to speak in Dharamsala at an invited group in 1991 on mental health and global peace for mankind. Now, I didn't feel in any way qualified to speak on those subjects. And so I wrote back and said, I think you must have made a mistake. I got a letter back saying, no, there's no mistake, and by the way, would you like to bring 5 people with you? Which I did. And all the way to India and up into the Himalaya, I had no idea what I was going to talk about. And the reason I'm telling you this whole story is because it's actually relevant to the entire subject. Because things, the moment happens when it all gels and it all makes sense. And when that moment happens, there is a functional, what I call a functional shift. There is a transformation that happens in the entire organism. So halfway up, while we were up into Dharamsala, and the night before we were due to do our presentation, or I was due to do my presentation, I'm sitting up on the roof, on the flat roof at the top of the Hotel Tibet, which some people listening may know. And this is back in 1991, so things are a little bit more primitive than they are now. The crows are making their noises, the moon is out, it's totally clear night, and I suddenly get it. And in fact, the words that came was not disease as a meaning at all. The words that came were, disease is a manifestation of health. Now, I know that as long as I live, that moment will be with me. And I'm not the first, and I won't be the last, who has that same insight and experience. The beauty of that was that the realization that the symptoms are, in fact, a totally healthy response of an organism seeking to change. And I don't even want to say an organism that is out of balance, trying to find balance, because actually the deeper I have gone into this, the more I realize that we are never out of balance. It may appear to be that way, but actually, as we really begin to look into study, we find that we are always in balance. But the symptoms of the disease, the illness, the discomfort, whatever it is that may be happening, is in fact a manifestation of an organism that is seeking to evolve, that is seeking to increase, to evolve in its consciousness, in its physiological and its spiritual state. That insight, disease is a manifestation of health, is what I used to inform the talk that I gave, and in fact all 5 of us spoke. And I then went on to hold a workshop to explore the idea a couple of years later, and we published it. But we published it as Diseases of Meaning, Manifestations of Health and Metaphor, because the 2 people that I was working with at the time, Peter Whitehouse from Cleveland and Dan Shostak, who was at the time at the Institute of Alternative Futures, Bill Clinton's think tank, both of them said disease is a manifestation of health is too strong, it's too confronting, it's too far in one step. In many ways, I wish I hadn't listened, because I think disease is a manifestation of health is so powerful, it's so beautiful, it's such a challenge. Now, in 1991, to come out with that was much more challenging than it is now, because a lot of people are talking about this stuff. So when I talk about diseases of meaning, I'm talking about the fact that every single human being's symptoms, no matter what they are a language. And they are a language that exists in order to enable that human being to grow, to evolve, and to have a healthier life. Now, that's challenging if you've got a child with Down syndrome, or you've got a relative dying of cancer, or you've got a relative with Alzheimer's disease, or whatever. It's not as... It needs deep thought and deep inquiry to really get to the bottom of this. But in essence, that's what diseases of meaning are. A long-winded answer, but I hope it gives the whole story.
No, I think that that's fantastic, and I love how you're doing a paradigm shift by reframing, seeing not disease, but seeing these symptoms as the body saying, okay, we need to change. I think so many times we see disease as something that's bad, as you know, but I believe it's there to give you a message. And so I love that. I think that's fantastic. Now I'm very curious. You mentioned universal language. So when you're working with people, have you found that there are some universal languages that the body speaks, or is everything so individualized that it's just individual?
Well, I'm going to say it's both. You know, many of your listeners may know Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life, which in fact was written by John DeMartini. But you can take a symptom and look at a book like that, or you can have a dream and go to a dream Bible. And they may approximate 70 to 80% maybe of what is going on. But the extraordinary thing is that for each person, it's unique. If we had half a dozen patients with asthma, for example, and they may have very similar lung function, and they may all six of them be functioning reasonably well, and they may need their Ventolin in the same sort of way, and they may, whatever treatment they're having. If you really explore the origin and the meaning of that to them, almost invariably you will find 6 different stories, 6 different meanings. And it may be that they all embrace suffocation or the sense of restraint or constraint in some way, shape, or form, but actually it's unique. And the thing that I find so extraordinary is that this is not something that can be pushed, it can't be forced, it's not about blame, it's not about, if somebody's sick and they want to use pills or allopathic medicine, that I have no judgment either way. The journey is unique to each person, and actually it's one of the most liberating things now. That, there was a time 20 years ago when I was much more energized by supporting the alternative movement. I'm not interested in alternative or polarization now. I'm interested in what it is that is taking place in any human being, where they are, and what that means. So there may be people who have incredibly low tolerance to pain, and they're going to use painkillers, which will affect the quality of their life and their perception. There may be others who really want to go into the heart of that pain and see what it heals. And my job is I see my privilege, it's not a job, it's an opportunity, it's a huge privilege to be alongside people in that exploration.
Now, I'm really curious if you have thoughts on Alzheimer's. I was having a conversation yesterday with a friend of mine who's a healer. I think it's fair she'd say she's a woo-woo healer. But she was working with someone who has Alzheimer's, and from her spiritual perspective and talking to the person's higher self, their entire life, their father died at a young age, they became the caregiver for the family and kind of had to do that, married someone that wanted taken care of, and so her perspective was that he, Alzheimer's was like, you know what, I'm done taking care of everyone. I need a break. I want to check out. And I thought that was really interesting. To me, that makes sense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, certainly I've seen situations that parallel that. Whoever that is very lucky. Alzheimer's disease, the dementias, it's incredibly complex. It's an incredibly complex field. People, in my experience, begin to hide or to forget for a whole host of different reasons. And that's not to say that one shouldn't do the investigations and check out what their mineral and vitamin status is, and check out whether they've had syphilis, or they're iron deficient, or they're B12 deficient, or they've got a brain tumor. That's not to say that one leaves the sense of the scientific behind. But if the depth of the inquiry, if one can be alongside somebody in that situation, may enable one to see what the path has been. So I have looked after, there was a time when I was clinically leading the development of an international project on Alzheimer's disease and the dementias in Oxford. So I've had exposure to many, many, many people, and with brain scans and blood tests and all the brain pathology and everything that goes with it. And I've been privileged to experience many extraordinary things. And I can tell you stories, we could talk for hours about it, because it is really very extraordinary. So as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking about a gentleman who had an extremely elevated position, was highly regarded, and he started to undergo a dementing process. I saw him in sort of moderate stages of the disease, and in the process of the evaluation that I was doing, we started to talk, and he felt confident enough to begin to share his story. And he was raped by 2 priests at the altar when he was a little boy. And it was very interesting that it opened up a whole route of inquiry for me. When you think about where the pathology happens in Alzheimer's disease, it sits in very specific parts of the brain that have to do with the integration of emotion, intellect, and memory. They come together in certain very key cells. Now, the brain tends to work through inhibition. If we actually released all the inhibition that keeps the nerve cells under control, there would be, in a sense, like a sort of flash of light, because everything would fire off at once. Now, imagine if you have the inhibition of a memory like that. And imagine if that inhibition, so if the cell is being stopped from firing, right, because as if the memory is the firing of a cell or a group of cells, and you think that something like that happens when you're 12 years old, and you come in to see me and you're 72 years old, for 60 years, the brain has been trying to stop that memory from coming into consciousness because it's too painful. Because there isn't the material or the context in which that experience can be transformed. The cells die. So this is an incredibly important defense mechanism. It's the end result in many people of a survival mechanism, just as cancer is often, when people don't see it, paradoxically a survival mechanism. Now, if one is fortunate enough to catch people early, and I'm thinking now about an amazing lady that I saw in her early 80s, and for whatever reason, she was at the sort of early to middle stages. Again, I was alone with her, and for whatever reason, she felt confident enough when I asked her, what is the real story? this was very interesting. She always used to wear her hair in a bun very tightly. And when I asked her that question, she took the pin out and let her hair down, and she looked beautiful. And she said, I've been married for nearly 60 years, and I've never been able to endow my husband to be a full man. And I knew this was huge. And I knew that in the hospital ward was not the moment in which to explore this. And so I went to see her in her home, and I took her for a walk around the field at the back of the house. And we talked. And she told me the whole story. And the whole story is so shocking that and I'm going to tell you a little bit because I think it's actually relevant to people all over the world. When this woman got married, it was very difficult for her because she was very tight to fulfill sexual intercourse. So she went to see her general practitioner, and her general practitioner was a rather brusque man who said, all right, I'll do something. And he inserted a metal rod to open it up and said, now go and do your duty. And of course for her that was just so utterly traumatic, and she was bleeding. And her husband, who was a perfect gentleman, couldn't and wouldn't. And so for nearly 60 years, that's how they lived. They adopted 2 children, and most people had no idea they were adopted. Now when I heard this story, of course, what happened was her dementia just was gone. I mean, she started to talk like a lucid human being. And I actually went to see a gynecologist and to talk to him about the situation, because I asked her if I said, what is it that you want to do with your life? And she said, I have only one aim in my life, and that's to enable my husband to be a full man. And so I went to see a gynecologist, and the long and short of it is that we set up a situation for him to be able to do what was necessary surgically. And he died having been able to fulfill himself as a man and she as a woman. Now, the amazing thing is that from that moment to the point at which she died, she had normal cognitive function. And the brain scan that had all the early signs that one would expect to see in an Alzheimer's type dementia started to reverse. It was really very, very interesting. Now, when he died, she deteriorated incredibly fast. And she didn't survive very long, but she became very demented. Now, these are just two stories, but they tell you a lot. It may be that there's somebody who has cared for everybody for the whole of their life, and they decide, now it's time for you to care for me. It's usually more complex than that.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious. I have been reading, you touched on this because you talked about the brain scans. I've been reading a lot how you can rewire your brain. For instance, I was reading a book and it was saying, for 3 months I said maybe take 10 minutes and say like, I am happy, life is good, something like that. But they talked about how it will literally rewire the brain. So I would call it rewiring, I guess, because if you're allowing her to speak, I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, if that kind of comes into play with what you do.
Yes, I think. All right, so what I'm about to say now, some people may find controversial. I think it's a whole lot of a hogwash that it is possible to be all the time positive. It's if you do the work and you look at really what happens, even if you try to repeat positive things all the time, you will find that there are as many negative things as there are positive things, no matter who you are, where you are, or what's happening in the universe. Whether you're the Dalai Lama, or you're a tramp on the street, or you're a convicted murderer, it's the same. And I think it's very important to understand that, and it's part of understanding that everything always and everywhere is in balance. It's actually in balance. It's not possible for it not to be, because the universe functions according to law, and those laws are immutable, whether they're being expressed in the DNA or whether they're being expressed in the molecules, in the cells, and the tissues. So rewiring the brain, I think I would probably put it maybe more subtly. And this is where the whole issue of meaning becomes so important. This is not woo-woo. It can be seen as woo-woo. But there is, in fact, a scientific basis to every aspect of what we've talked about. If you think about it, every thought, every feeling, every experience that you have is preceded by and gives rise to a biochemical change, at the very least a biochemical change. And every molecule is made up of particles, of atoms, of protons, of electrons, right down to the tiny and infinite, to the infinitesimal, all the way to Planck's constant. So it's not possible for the experience to happen without there being some form of energetic phenomenon. It is the result of and gives rise to a phenomenon. Now, if the meaning of something is what determines outcome, then I would venture to suggest that rewiring is more about the transformation of meaning. And that happens by looking more deeply at what may or may not be going on. If I hold this pen like this and you see it as a weapon of war, then you're going to respond to it in a very particular way with a very particular hormonal response. If you look at this pen as something that is going to sign your death sentence, you're going to look at this pen with a very, very distinct emotional environment. But if, on the other hand, you look at this pen as the pen that is going to release you from 25 years of solitary confinement, this pen is going to have an emotional charge, the like of which very few things will ever have. Now, you can experience that phenomenon directly. And it's my experience that that is the case for every aspect of our lives. And we are all challenged one way or another with this right through until we die. I'm no exception. But if we were to really understand this, we would have the vehicle, the means to totally transform what is taking place in the world. Now, I go a step further, and my argument, my thesis, is that what we are seeing in terms of the environment, what we're seeing in terms of banking, what we're seeing in terms of political upheaval, industrial upheaval, educational upheaval, and all that's taking place in science, I see as a disease of meaning. In other words, the crisis is what enables us to access the next step. And when we can see that, we actually change. Simply with that idea, we change the internal environment. So if instead of somebody coming with a diagnosis, and that diagnosis being presented as a death sentence that is going to have you drug dependent for the rest of your life, let's say like diabetes, but instead we see this as a vehicle that is going to enable you to completely re-examine the way in which you live your life. And then as a result of that, seeing that there are ways that you can totally transform your physiology, as a result of that understanding, then all of a sudden this is not a death sentence, it's a life sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
But that's the big paradigm shift. I mean, I don't know how, I can't speak, I know that you live in England, but here in the U.S., I view, it's my true hope that the American Health Care Act, also known, people call it Obamacare, that pushes Americans into more of what you're talking about, to doing alternative, I don't like that word alternative medicine, it should be, that's what we need to do, but here the answer is, okay, how do we attack it, cut it off, fix it? It's not going deeper and finding the root of the problem. And so my hope is that this has become such a mess that it forces people to look at different ways to have better health, and that people are like, you know what, I'm fed up with just dealing with insurance companies, I'm going to go seek alternatives.
Mm-hmm. I don't have any doubt that that's going to happen. The little that I know about the United States healthcare system is shocking. It's salutary. and I am involved to some extent because I've been working for the last 5.5 years on and off with an initiative called Neura Health Sciences, NURA, Neura Health Sciences, which is based in Seattle on Vashon Island and run by a guy called Wayne Miller. This initiative holds the key, one of the very important keys to the transformation of the United States healthcare system, and that will then have a global impact, I have no doubt. And I'll tell you why. This perspective opens the door to a much more subtle understanding of the nature of matter, energy, and science. Now, what we are beginning to understand, when I grew up in university, we were told that the genes were it, and you can't change your genetic heritage in this life. It's the next generation. Well, welcome to the world of epigenetics. Epigenetics is about the changes that you can make in this life that can be inherited and that we know that we can make and are extremely important. That's just the stepping stone to something even greater. With Neura Health Sciences, what is being created is a mechanism to collect the data for the first time in United States history about the differential outcome in healthcare conditions of those using integrative medicine or alternative medicine interventions compared with the orthodox, and looking at the cost effectiveness of those different outcomes. And so far, the data that is being generated is nothing short of almost unbelievable. There will be billions of dollars saved as a result of these interventions. Now, Obama is on record as saying, if somebody can find me the solution to healthcare, they will win me the election. The United States healthcare system is single-handedly going to bankrupt the United States economy, in my mind, and it's going to be the same globally. We have the same in the United Kingdom, and it's the same in the developing world. We simply cannot sustain a medical system that is based on an understanding of biomolecular medicine that is now already out of date. And the changes that are coming are completely extraordinary, and the generation that is coming through are equipped in a completely different way to understand it and work with it. But this, what I'm talking about, what has driven me for the last 25 years, is part of that paradigm shift. When we can understand, when we understand that what we think truly affects ourselves at every level, we have the most amazing technology, because it's all here.
Now, I'm curious, when you work with someone, you mentioned a couple of people that you work with, do you have to, because you talked about digging deeper, does someone have to experience a trauma? Do they have to be able to acknowledge what happened? I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but in different modalities I've heard, you know what, it doesn't matter what it was. You know, maybe say like acupuncture, for example. Maybe you don't have to examine what it is, but you just get acupuncture to help treatment. How does that work when you work with someone?
So every person is different, and some people need to have other interventions. Some people don't. It is not, in my experience, always necessary for people to have to go through an endless psychotherapeutic process of re-experiencing in some way and beating their chest. No. It's very beautiful. I'm thinking now about a client who came to see me and another colleague of mine, two colleagues of mine, with metastatic breast cancer. She's 36 years old. And her journey will actually inspire many, many people. But in the early stages of the recurrence of her cancer, her liver was enlarged and painful. And you know, anybody who has had that kind of liver capsule pain will know it's not a joke. And she had gone through a cycle of having pain relief to deal with this, and had come to me because she wanted to go deeper. She had a very deep and clear sense that everything that was happening to her was important for her to make sense of her life, even if she was going to die. And so when we entered the pain, as often happens, there was a momentary increase of the intensity. And then her job was to stay with it. Now, what was actually revealed to her was the essence of a whole host of experiences that she'd had over a long period of time. So it wasn't that she had to go and relive all of that stuff. It's a bit like having a juice. You squeeze out all the goodness, the essence that is there. You don't have to go and remake the carrot. You drink the juice. And by being courageous enough to go into the pain, she got the juice. And what is so extraordinary is that having got the juice, the pain went. It was no longer needed. And the mass began to shrink. So, you can never tell what it's going to be, but no, I've got an analogy which people might enjoy. I used to, I had a Jungian training, and I've always been very interested in psychotherapy, and especially in the importance of myths and legend stories to people's healing, because basically each one of us has a life that's a story. And I came one time in trying to explain something to a patient. What came to me was the idea of a compost heap. A compost heap exists in order to transform matter. And all the waste material goes into the compost heap. And it smells, and it's doing its thing. And when it's finished, you have this beautiful black stuff that can grow your vegetables and your plants and your fruits and your flowers, that can feed you and sustain you and make life beautiful. And one goes in this way and the other comes out the other way. On the journey of a compost heap, you generally turn it twice, or I do. It takes 2 years, really. And when you turn it in order that you can aerate it and the worms can do their job, and da-da-da-da. And then you leave it. You don't strew it all out over the garden and look and say, oh, look, there's a chicken bone there and there's an egg there. Somebody must have had this and try to somehow dissect out the whole life of what went into the compost heap. You turn it in order that it can do its job of transformation. That's what I do. That's what the symptom allows the person to do, and my job is to facilitate that in the unique way that is appropriate to them, if that makes sense.
I think that's a wonderful analogy, and I compost, so I appreciate that. I'd like to read a quote that when you gave me your paper that you wrote, which I loved. It was from Mother Teresa. The biggest disease today is not leprosy or tuberculosis, but rather the feeling of being unwanted, uncared for, and deserted by everyone. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, and then I know it keeps getting back to the individual, but it made me wonder, are there universal themes with when you see, feeling unwanted, like she mentioned, or feeling like you don't deserve or you're not good enough? Have you noticed maybe that's the root cause of no matter how it's manifested or shows up in someone?
There's no doubt that these things are common to all human beings. In fact, I go as far as to suggest that every human being has every trait. I think, we're all somewhere a murderer, and we're all somewhere a saint. We're all somewhere unwanted or feel unwanted. We're all somewhere feel unworthy or not worthy enough. And somewhere we're also all supremely arrogant and also very balanced. I think it just takes a different form in each person. Now, I included that quote from Mother Teresa, and in 1999, when we published the paper, or 1998, because I think it took about a year to be published. I would take issue with it now, from where I sit now. I don't know that that is the biggest disease that faces humankind. And actually, as one goes deep, I'm going to perhaps say something very controversial. I would even question there's no question in my mind that what Mother Teresa did was extraordinary. I would also, however, question some of the basis on which she was doing what she was doing, as I would for most human beings. You know, to idolize somebody doesn't do them a service either. But being unwanted, and can you find me anybody who hasn't had that feeling?
No.
We all have it at some point or another. You know, and it's really how we work with that that will affect our lives and our relationships with other people. But I am, you know, if you look at in our developed world, in our world driven by the likes of The Secret and the whole sort of massive explosion of self-development and self-improvement and law of attraction and all the rest of the stuff, which can so obsess people,
That's true.
we kind of lose the plot when the other half of the world is trying to manage on next to nothing. It's interesting, that juxtaposition. So I actually think that the biggest disease is not feeling unwanted or unloved. I think the biggest disease, dis-ease, is the very deep and very real yearning of consciousness to evolve. And I think that we're actually paradoxically at a moment of extraordinary opportunity in the midst of this crisis.
I love that. I agree with you 1,000%. Just speaking from my own personal journey and how I've grown and increased in awareness, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about food now, because I've been to your website and diet is a huge part of what you talk about. And I've had this realization in the last couple of years that food really can be healing. You know, but we are in this mass-produced, fast food, 24/7 kind of mentality here, but I believe food has the power to heal you, but I'd love for you to talk about it.
Well, what you believe is exactly what I believe. There's no question that food is healing, and food has the power to heal. Food has the power to kill, and food has the power to heal. There's a difference between food and nutrition, in the sense that I'm just being slightly pedantic here. Yes, because food can kill. You know, look at that amazing film about the guy who ate McDonald's hamburgers for a month or however long he did it. You know, and what is it, Supersize Me, and filmed himself on the journey to becoming incredibly sick. What is so extraordinary to me, actually, is that so many of my profession, it would appear, still fail to recognize that food is the root cause of and potentially the most powerful means of healing, the root cause of so much disease and a very powerful means of healing. It just seems so extraordinary. So yes, you know, it's a study, it's a requirement. We've got big challenges, especially in the United States, where your organic food movement seems to have been so brutally corrupted by government and in the pay of major pharmaceutical and industrial concerns. And, you know, I speak as one who worked very closely with the pharmaceutical industry for 8 years. I know something about that. But I think the us and them approach isn't going to heal it. We need, just as we've been talking about all the way through, we need to understand that the polarization is a reflection of a level of of meaning, of a level of understanding, and we need to be able to go beyond it. So somehow that whole complex, that whole pharmaceutical complex, industrial complex, needs to be enlightened. And I don't mean that in a foofy-doof way at all. I actually, the pharmaceutical industry is in many respects panicking, because it's, where are the magic bullets going to come from? They're not going to come from old thinking. And the pharmaceutical company of the future is the pharmaceutical company that's going to embrace something like homeopathy, or look at the energy medicine alternatives. And I believe some of them are going to do that. Now, that's a far cry from food. Where it's important in food is for the people to recognize that there is actually an energetic difference between a manufactured substance, whether that be a protein, a carbohydrate, a fat, or some kind of synthetic biscuit, and the same ingredients that have been grown and mixed and baked. There is an energetic difference which we can measure. The beauty is that we're entering a time when we can measure these things, and we can demonstrate these things with very sophisticated and sometimes quite simple technologies. There are people in the United States, and especially in Russia and the Eastern Bloc, who developed amazing technologies to do this. And you can see it. You can see the fingerprint of a vegetable or a plant that is grown non-organically, and the fingerprint of a vegetable or a plant that is grown organically. They are different. They can be measured to be different. They can be demonstrated to be different. And then as you pursue that, and you measure the biochemistry and the physiology of a human being eating those different diets, or an animal eating those different diets, it can be shown. And you only have to go online and start to look at what happens when people start eating raw or cleaning up their diets. I mean, it's not rocket science.
Absolutely. Can you talk us through, or tell us, if someone were come to a consultation with you, do you have them do a questionnaire? Do you do muscle testing? What would their experience be like?
Well, they come to see me. Generally speaking, I will have spoken to somebody on the telephone in a telephone consultation at first. I want to have a sense of them. They want to have a sense of me. And on occasion, at the end of that conversation, they may feel, no, this isn't what I want to do. And I may say to them, you know what, I don't think I'm the right person for you to see. And I think you might want to go and see X, Y, or Z. But having passed, as it were, come through that part, when somebody comes to see me, they come and they sit, and my job is to have a conversation. And I want to know what it is that they really want to get out of the work. And sometimes that comes as a shock to people. But no matter who it is, they actually do have an idea. It may take a little while to get to it, is what it is that they really, really want out of it. And sometimes what they really, really want is not what they thought they wanted. And then we will explore. They will talk and we will explore. There'll come a time when I'll do a physical examination, because I am a physician and people come with a whole range of different problems, and I do that for a reason. It's not just to check up what might be going on. And many times I will find things that, because one of the tragedies of what has happened in medicine is that doctors don't examine their patients anymore. They very, very rarely examine their patients. And that's a tragedy, because you miss things, but much, much more importantly, you miss the opportunity to touch the patient, and for the patient to be touched. And I mean that in every sense of the word, to touch. It's an opportunity, and sometimes, when I examined somebody a couple of months ago, and she said to me, "Do you know, doctor, you are the first person who has touched me in 7 years."
Wow.
To be alone. Nobody touched her. And the opportunity to have my hand on her head and my stethoscope, listening to her heart and feeling her tummy, and You know, something happens. There's an energetic exchange that happens. So that's an integral part of the work that I do. And then we will decide on whether they need investigations. And often they do. I do functional medicine investigations that you can't have done in the routine health services. And I may or may not use a homeopathic remedy. I will invariably talk about diet because people know they want to make changes. We will think about nutrition, and I work with unique nutrients that are all in the food state. And the food state means that they are in the same chemical form structure as found in the living plants and living matter. And that has that's not just a sort of again, it's not a foo-foo-doo statement. When product is taken or harvested from plants and animals, the product itself is in what we call has fully satisfied bonding. Now, just very, very briefly, vitamin C, for example, is not ascorbic acid in any orange, in any spinach, in any raspberry. It's actually a complex of probably between 80 and 120, 130 different things. That's a completely different molecule. So I work with nutrients that are in the food state with fully satisfied bonding, and that transforms the physiology. And then we will certainly follow the lead that comes out of the story. But I also do an exercise, a very specific exercise that I've done for a long time. I ask people to think about whether they have regrets if they were to die now. If there are things that they would like to have said or done or been places to visit. And then, generally speaking, people do. And then I look at how long they think they're going to live. And I ask them the question, how would your life have looked between now and when you're going to die if you were to die without regrets? What would it be to live a life at the end of which you have no regret? Now, I give them only a few minutes to do it, and I ask them to draw it. To draw the people, the things that might... And it is remarkable what comes. Absolutely remarkable, because what comes often, providing people are willing to give space to it, is something that comes out of deep inside themselves, which they can access in the consultation, because somehow the consultation space is different. That then serves as a remedy. Because when you draw that picture, if you ask that picture what the symptom is about, and if the symptom is about living a life at the end of which you have no regret, it will tell you what you need to do to cure the symptom. So it's a kind of matrix that people, and I don't know what's going to come when, but my one commitment is to be there as much as I can and to listen.
That's
they are their own healer.
Absolutely, I believe that. What advice would you have for someone that's watching or listening that may be really struggling with a health problem right now or something that's very stressful and traumatic? What would you say to them?
The first thing I would say to them is give yourself permission accept it where it is, and just entertain the idea that it's here with a gift for you in its hands. And I don't mean that as a facile comment. I've suffered. I've had my own illnesses. I've been in extreme pain, emotionally and physically. And so this is not a facile statement. The first is it's to open that possibility. What is this? And ask yourself the question, what is this trying to tell me? What is it that I'm not listening to? And am I not listening to something, an impulse that is saying to me, I must do something? If that is what is going on, do it. and think about what it is to live a life at the end of which you have no regrets. How does this relate? That's the first thing. The second thing is, don't take no for an answer. If whoever is looking after them or the advice that has been had doesn't resonate, if you don't want to have drugs because they're not working and they're giving you side effects, don't take them. Don't take no for an answer and keep looking. There is an amazing amount of information out on the internet, which is very confusing. And there are, interestingly, when you stop and you open and you ask, somehow help or advice comes. I don't know how it works, but it does.
Fantastic. Now, can you tell people where to find more information about you, your website? I don't know if you can.
Okay, so the website, I don't know, do you put this up at the end or something? I don't know. The website is www.functionalshift.com. I call the process, what happens when the shift in perception happens? I call it a functional shift. Because when the shift in perception happens, you can't go back. It's fundamental. You know when a baby comes out, from 1 second to the next, you can't put it back. It won't fit. I mean, you're a mum. It won't fit. It's a mystery. Well, it's the same with functional shift. When the perception happens, that's it. It's done. So it's www.functionalshift.com, and then we have nutritional shift where we sell these unique nutrients. I can see people. I do an increasing amount of work, and I absolutely love doing it on Skype. We can do amazing work on Skype. People don't have to come to see me one-to-one. And you know, I have worked with people in India, in Africa, in the United States, and Canada. I'm very happy to do that.
Excellent. Well, thank you. This was absolutely wonderful. I learned so much. I am excited about what I feel is the paradigm shift. I think the fact that you said to look at it as your body communicating, and and see that as a positive instead of most people go into panic mode and, oh my gosh, this is a negative. But I think that's a huge shift for people to have.
It is. It is, and I hope it helps.
It did, absolutely. Thank you, and I want to thank you for your patience and having everything change on you at the last minute. And I want to thank everyone for watching and listening, and we'll see you here next week on Reawaken Your Brilliance. All right, everyone, get out there and have a great day. Bye now.
Listen, bye.